Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Darkness. Gather round and try to stay in the light. Some of the others from the dark aren't quite as civil as I am, and I hate cleaning up that mess. My Manipulative Stalker, from Anonymous. I'm an 18-year-old female security guard and weigh about 125 pounds. This will be important to note. I started this job a little over half a year ago now and have had some crazy experiences, but I also think that's what makes me love it so much. There's never a dull moment while in uniform. So basically, I work for a security company who then gets hired from other businesses, large events, etc. I have worked all over, but because I recently started college, I have cut my hours more than in half. Because of this, I also decided to stick to one location every weekend to make life a little bit simpler. For the past 3 or so months, the location I have been working has been a public library a few cities away from my own. When I got this assignment, I couldn't help but laugh and think, a library really needs a security guard? But I soon found out that, yes, they sure do. This library is in a ghetto part of town with a high crime rate, as well as a high rate of homelessness. That being said, I have lots of interesting stories, but we'll stick with just one today. So a little over a month ago, a man in his late 30s came up to me and asked if the library had any bags for sale. He was a tall, lanky black man who had a slight limp. I sat quiet for a minute trying to figure out why this guy came to the library for anything other than a book, as he cut my thoughts off and said, "I'm homeless and I'm just trying to find a cheap bag to carry my stuff." I told him I was unsure and would go ask management. I went upstairs to ask if I could purchase him one, simply just to be a good person, and received a hard no. I was furious and disappointed in humanity, but I'm now thanking God that I received that answer. I went back downstairs and found the man, telling him we were unable to help him. I was in a very emotional state because I was extremely heartbroken and felt I was unable to do the right thing. This is where his obsession began. He mistakenly took my kindness as a sign of interest in him. After that, he showed up every weekend for the past month, and we have a 15 to 20 minute conversation each time. At the time, I didn't find anything to be strange about those conversations, but thinking back now, there's a few. Firstly, I recall 2 times when he asked me where I live, both times receiving the same answer of, "I'm not from around here." Second being about the college I attend. When we met, where I went to school was one of the first things he asked me, which personally I don't think is a strange question. I get it all the time and never thought there would be an issue for answering it. So I did just that. He responded by saying, "No way, I do too. I just had to drop out though because I'm having financial issues." This lined up with his story, so I believed it. A few weeks passed and he came back telling me that he would be coming back to my school for the spring semester and he would look for me. I felt a little uncomfortable about this. Something just struck me the wrong way about how he worded it. But with that being said, he seemed like a very kind man, so I brushed it off. Recently, about 2 weekends ago, I was sitting towards the back of the library on my phone. I'm allowed to be on my phone as long as I'm taking laps every once in a while and still staying aware of what is going on. So as usual, I looked up and scanned the area to do just that. I looked back and forth and finally all the way to the left. I noticed that the man I had been talking to was sitting a little ways down, but still behind me. He was slouched in his seat, body facing me, staring. Even as I began to stare back at him in confusion, he refused to look away. I got very uncomfortable and my stomach dropped. I believed so strongly in gut instincts, and as my pulse rose, I grabbed my stuff and began to walk back to my office. When I finally got back, I hurried to open up the security cameras, rewinding a few minutes and saw him sitting there non-stop staring at me. I didn't know this while it was happening, but as I stood up, he did too. As I walked to my office, he did too. I even noticed at one point he stopped behind some bookshelves to see which direction I was going. I switched to live to see what he was doing, and he was sitting on a couch right outside my office. He sat there for 5 to 10 minutes, but when I didn't come out, he left. I should also mention that I watched every single minute of the 30 minutes he was there, and my findings freaked me out even more. In those 30 minutes, he never once looked at a book, magazine, computer, or anything. It was almost as if he was just there to see me. The next day, I saw him walk in and immediately walked to my office before he could notice me. I watched him on the cameras as he paced back and forth, doing about 5 laps around our very large library. He again never once looked at a book, but instead was clearly looking for me as he turned his head back and forth while doing his laps. When he couldn't find me, he left. I felt very uncomfortable and went to about 4 different supervisors, and none of them took me seriously, considering I'm the one who is supposed to deal with issues like that. Finally, I went to my boss, who is a current police officer in the city, and he was very concerned. He pulled up his records, and we found things I was not even close to being mentally prepared for. It felt as if we were scrolling through entire pages of things he'd done. The first being him doing this to multiple other women in different forms. That's the nicest way I can put it. He had 2 open cases for this, one being at my college at the beginning of this semester. When I say I was horrified, I genuinely have never felt that way before in my life. He also had a few charges for battery as well, telling me that the seemingly kind man I knew was actually an aggressive, manipulative man who was playing me so hard. He obviously had many other charges, but none of those connect to my situation. I also found out 2 more things. First being that he was in the highest security prison in my entire state, where our most dangerous criminals go, according to their website. Second, possibly being the worst of them all, my boss told me that in 2010 he had stalked another female employee at the library and was temporarily banned. He not only stalked her at work, but also took it as far to stalk her and follow her outside of work. With now knowing all of this information and working with the police regularly at my job, I definitely let them in on what was going on. I also wrote up a report to get him banned from the library yet again. But that typically takes a while, and even after that, I'm not sure how long he will be banned because it is always different. Through all of my overthinking, I began putting some pieces together. When he told me he was homeless, he wasn't lying, but he was in fact homeless because he had just gotten out of prison. When he told me he dropped out of my college, sure, he wasn't lying, but he forgot to mention that it was because he messed with a young girl. Long story short, be very aware of your surroundings, because in this situation, if I wasn't, I don't even want to think about what could have happened to me. Oh, and always trust your gut, because you'd rather be safe than sorry. So to the man who stalked and manipulated me, please, let's not ever meet again. The weird guy I met at work. From Anonymous. At my first job, I met this guy. He was nice, but I was in no way attracted to him. I continued to be his friend and made it pretty clear I'd only be friends with him. I eventually stopped hanging out with him and started ignoring him, but sometimes I fear he'll show up at my job, again. I noticed very early on that he was very clingy and would rush to hang out. It was always almost immediately after asking if we could hang out he'd want to stop by. Still, I pushed it aside and said, hey, maybe he just has no friends. However, he held grudges very strongly. Once, this girl who also worked with us didn't say hi back to him, and he said screw her, she can die. He wishes bad on anyone who is rude to him. Another red flag to run, but yet I continued to be nice. Summer had ended and I was going back to college. Even though I was about an hour away, he still wanted to hang out. He was willing to drive all the way here just to hang out. I found it kind of annoying that he just wouldn't make more friends and try to push it off. Once he even texted me saying he'd shoot himself. So I called him to try and comfort him and tell him that things would get better. During college, I finally found someone who I liked, and we started dating. That's when he got even more clingy and weird. He was always depressed and talking about how no one wants him and that 21 was a good age to die. At that point, I was severely annoyed at him because he was trying to guilt me into dating him. Why not me? What's wrong with me? Every time I'd choose to hang out with my boyfriend, he'd text things like, "You'll never hear from me again, I'll be dead." I ignored him because something was not right with that guy. Summer came around again. I was still working at the same company, but a different location. I was still kind of friends with him, though I avoided hanging out with him while I was at college. He worked at the same company, but at the previous location. He wanted to transfer to my location because he hated the people there and I'd be working at the new location. Some point during the summer, I started to ignore him because he was even more annoying and trying to guilt me into dating him. My boyfriend clearly did not like him because he thinks he's crazy and didn't want me near him. An example being, during the same summer, he started talking about buying a gun because he wanted to tag along with my boyfriend and I. I told him I want alone time and he'd be a third wheel. This is where things get weird. After the fallout and weeks of not texting, he came into my line at the store to buy one single item and said not a word. May I point out that there were 7 other lines open and he works at the same company but a different location. While working, every now and again, I'd look around and see him walking out near the cashier line. Every time I saw him, I was in the corner register, so thankfully he couldn't see me. I saw him there on 3 different occasions. I often wonder if he has been in the store more than I've seen him. College started again, and I went to live on campus. I'd get texts from him every now and then, saying things like, "Hi," or "Hey, how are you?" Then he started messaging me on Snapchat to say, "Let's talk about this like adults." I finally replied because at this point he wouldn't leave me alone. I told him I had no interest in being his friend because he was so toxic and he needed to make new friends. He finally gave up. However, winter break has come and I have to decide if I want to work during the break or not. He often talked about getting his gun license. My one fear is that he'll show up when I'm at work. However, I don't feel safe at home either. I forgot to mention, he lives about 5 minutes away from me. That was another red flag that sprung up in my head during our friendship. He was looking to move out of his parents. I just found it eerily creepy that he chose the town I was in, and minutes away. I have a feeling he'll be lurking in the store. When I go home, I wonder if he's sitting in his car in the street next to my house. Stalker Story from Rowan B. 1917. About 5 years ago, when I was 20, I was living in Frankfurt, Germany as a student. Most Friday nights, I went to a meetup for coders, and it was a great time. I made some friends. We did things outside of the coding events. It was great. Anyways, one friend, let's call him B, goes to France for vacation. He comes back, and a while later, a guy shows up on his doorstep, some dude he met in a hostel. He gave his address to a stranger in a hostel and offered his couch for the guy to stay on, and B did not remember the guy's name until he showed up. Anyway, this guy, we'll call him New Guy, is from Israel, ex-military, on vacation. He shows up to coding night. I talked to him briefly, but we're playing with some cool VR stuff and Google Glass that night, so I'm honestly not talking much to anyone. I just program for a bit, play with the VR and AR stuff, and eat my pizza. I probably introduced myself to New Guy and told him a little about myself. Cue the next day. My friend B calls me the next day and asks me to go to lunch. Nothing super unusual about that, so I did, and B and New Guy shows up. Okay, I had thought it would just be me and B, or me, B, and his girlfriend, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make New Guy feel bad for showing up unexpectedly since B must have invited him and forgot to tell me. Anyway, B gets a call from his girlfriend and says he has to go. Apparently, something serious was going on with one of her parents, and she was freaking out. B had to leave immediately, so he goes, and leaves me alone with New Guy. I'm alone in this restaurant with an ex-military dude who does not speak German and can't seem to figure out public transport. So I'm like, okay, fine. Let's go someplace populated. The Zeal. We stay out until it gets late, and I offer to take him back to B's place. He says no. He doesn't want to bother him this late. I say, okay, let's go to a hostel. He agrees hesitantly. I knew he wanted me to invite him back to my place, but I did not want him knowing where I lived. Only 2 of my friends actually knew where I lived, and only 1 knew the room number, just because I'm a little paranoid. So I take New Guy to the nearest hostel and say goodbye. He grabs my wrist, and I seriously can't pull away. I'm struggling, and he has this grip that actually left bruises on my wrists. He says, "I want to be with you always. We are written in the stars." What the hell? I just met this dude the night before, and he's trying to pull some star alignment stuff on me? I tried to pull away, but I couldn't, and he grabs my other arm and pins me to the wall. I tried pulling away, told him I wasn't interested, that I was here for my studies and then heading back to the States. He wasn't having any of it. He told me he had a house in Israel that I could live in. I said I have no desire to go to Israel. He insists it would be great and that we are meant to be, just the kind of craziness that normally only happens in fairy tales. Keep in mind, I've known this guy for less than 2 days, and we barely talked the first time we met. So I do what anyone else would do with their hands pinned to the wall. I kneed him in the crotch and pulled away, and sprint my butt out of there. I took a night bus close to my dorm, then walked the rest of the way because I'm freaking out. I go through these gardens near my place since they are technically closed. It's around midnight, and I know my way through them in the dark. I take winding paths, trying to calm myself and convince myself I could not have been followed. There's only one night bus that goes to my place. It only comes every hour or so, and my apartment is off the stop-a-ways. Still, I can't help but feel nervous. I'm rubbing my wrists, which are bruised, and telling myself I never have to see this dude again. I make it to my room and go to bed. End of story, right? Nope. My roommate knocks on my door at about 6 in the morning, telling me there's a guy in our apartment looking for me. I step outside and find new guy. That isn't the scariest part. That guy had no idea where I lived, what building I was in, or what floor. B didn't even know. And there are 4 locked doors he had to get through, each with a different key. 1 to the building, 1 to the floor, 1 to the apartment, and 1 to my room. He made it through 3 of the 4 locked doors. Anyways, I took one look at him, tell him to go away, then shut and lock my bedroom door. I'm panicking and I message one of my other friends, A, on Facebook to come pick me up. Because what else do? I know this dude is stronger than me, he has combat training. He found his way into my apartment and he's not leaving. I don't have a phone to call the police or anything. All I have is my Facebook, and I didn't know how to contact emergency services then. My roommate had already gone into her room, and new guy is just pacing around our tiny hallway. A says he'll be there soon, but he lives outside of Frankfurt, so it will be about 45 minutes. Meanwhile, I hear something at my door. I look over and new guy has shoved a stack, like 8 pages, of handwritten notes under my door. I start to read them, and they are all reasons why he would be a good husband, and why we need to be together. I skimmed, to be honest. I did not read it fully. I folded up the papers and stuck him in my bag to show A why I was so freaked out by this dude. A appears in the parking lot, and I climb down 3 floors out of my window so I don't have to fight off new guy. A and I spend the whole day out. Movies, zoo, sushi, bowling, and we get back around 2 a.m. A walks me to my room, and new guy is still there. Outside my door, curled up in the hallway in the apartment. By the way, he had told me he had a flight the next day to leave Germany, yet he was still here. A, who is a skinny but tall and imposing dude, grabs new guy and almost drags him outside as I run in and lock my door again. I don't know what A did, but new guy didn't come back. A said he had a talk with new guy, but I'm guessing something more happened. 2 years later, new guy friend requests me on Facebook to ask for his letters back, because he put so much effort into it and wanted to give it to his girlfriend. I blocked him. He found me on LinkedIn. I blocked him. He found me on Instagram. I blocked him. I'm honestly terrified this dude will find me in real life again and kill me or something. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more. If you want to hear your story narrated, you can submit it to storiesofdarkness55@gmail.com. And don't forget you can also listen to these stories on Spotify, link in the description down below. And as always, pleasant dreams.